A still field of stars, a soft green thread at the edge of sight. I let your gaze rest there for a moment, the way a lighthouse rests on a distant line of water. The room settles around us. Your shoulders find the pillow's shape. The air has the hush of a library between pages. I'm your sleepy scientist tonight, and will move gently. A traveller from beyond our sun is crossing the dark and will keep pace at the quiet speed of breath. No rush, no spectacle, just a calm walk through what the instruments see and what they suggest, with pauses long enough to drift. If sleep calls, answer it. I'll keep narrating in low light until the story folds into your dreams. Before we begin, a small kindness for yourself. Set the phone to Do Not Disturb, dim the screen, and cue the Sleepy Science playlist so the night stays unbroken. If headphones help, make them loose and soft. You won't miss anything urgent here. The sky keeps its own patient calendar. We'll stay close to safety and truth. We'll speak in plain lines, and when the data is firm, I'll say it plainly. When it is only a quiet possibility, I'll let it wear a softer tone. Think of this as a slow evening tide. Facts like small waves, arriving, shining, and sliding back into the dark without a splash. We begin now. Let your eyes move slowly across the dim field, from the wide dark to the smallest fleck of glow near the edge of thought. The stars hold still, and between two of them, a pale, soft green seems to gather itself. Not bright, not urgent, only present. I trace that hush of colour with you. The shape is no more than a tender smudge against the black, a sliver whose faintness asks for patience. We don't stare, we stroll with our gaze, letting the glow become familiar, like learning the outline of a lantern from across a quiet field. I keep the line of light steady and simple. This traveller does not belong to the sun in the old, closed sense. Its path is open, not a circle, but a gentle bow that never closes, proof that it came from beyond and will go beyond again. We have seen this sort of passage only twice before in our instruments' lives, once in 2017 and again in 2019, each time a reminder that our small neighbourhood is connected to a larger road of space. Tonight, the thought is plain. 3 is not a crowd here. 3 is a confirmation, a calm sign that the bridge between stars is real. It arrived in our logs on a soft night in mid-year. Survey cameras noticed a point that did not behave like the familiar ones, and the Minor Planet Center confirmed the Interstellar tag. The name that settled was simple and kind to the tongue, 3I Atlas, the third interstellar visitor our catalogues have agreed upon. I like how the designation carries both the count and the instrument, like a beam engraved with the maker's stamp. You don't need the internal memos to rest easy. The process is old and careful, and each new measurement tends to the earlier ones the way a caretaker tends a lamp. Small adjustments, no drama, steady hands. The colour you sensed first is a clue, but not a verdict. Comets often throw a greenish shawl when sunlight wakes certain fragile molecules, and cameras notice this more than eyes do. As this traveller drifts inward, warming a touch, a thin atmosphere called a coma unrolls from the surface and scatters that light. The tail, such as it is, points away from the sun by habit, obeying the same quiet physics that guides every dusty wanderer. Ahead lies a closer pass to our star than to us, and that geometry is a comfort. The green remains gentle, or hint more than a sign, and the sky keeps its calm. Brightness stays modest, which makes the story kinder to those trying to sleep. Most listeners will never see it with unaided eyes, and that is fine. Much that matters is invisible to us and obvious to a small telescope. Survey observatories follow the points from night to night, building a portrait from many patient glances. I picture those beams of light crossing oceans and deserts to find it, then returning with a few more photons each time, a slow, almost tender exchange that turns uncertainty into contour, contour into confidence. Interstellar simply means it is not bound. The sun can warm it, pull at it, and lean on its speed, yet in the arithmetic of the path there is a margin of freedom that never closes. Even the little breaths of gas that slip from its surface as it warms, the tiny impulses that can nudge a comet this way or that, have little to say about the larger truth. It is passing through, and it will keep going. I think of that when I consider how far apart everything really is, and how light helps us know anything at all, because light is both messenger and map, sketching this visitor softly into our awareness, even as it moves on to the next quiet place. And in that long sentence, you can feel how space invites us to slow down and let the glow speak for itself. So we end this first look where we began, eyes on the gentlest part of the image. The faint green softens as if thinned with moonlight. The tale's thread pales until it feels like breath on glass. The colour dissolves toward blue at the edges, and the frame keeps its hush. The room carries a low electrical hush, and I let the instruments keep time. The detector warms, the shutter whispers, the log window fills with lines that arrive like gentle metronome clicks. One more tick, and there it is. A clean designation settling into the ledger, the way a drum finds its beat after silence. I read the characters softly, first the interstellar flag, then the survey name, feeling how a few symbols can change the pitch of a night. The minor planet center speaks in tidy measures. A circular posts, a revision follows, and the cadence becomes familiar. Provisional notes, rapid confirmations, orbit refinements that land on the downbeat of each new observation. I imagine the global network as a slow percussion ensemble, the smallest observatory sending a single tap, the largest adding a deep, steady tone, until the rhythm resolves into 3 Atlas. The third interstellar traveller is not an announcement shouted across the sky. It's a measured phrase repeated until even the quietest listener can hear it. I move to the orbit solver and listen to a different clock. Horizons, with its careful ephemerides, steps, time in seconds, minutes, days. Each step is a click that redraws the future by a hair. The mean anomaly shifts. The eccentricity sits just over 1, and the argument of perihelion sings a fixed pitch while everything else waltzes around it. I nudge the solution forward and back, hearing the hyperbola's open bar as an unending measure, no cadence back to tonic, only motion with a gentle residue of speed that will never be removed. Survey frames arrive like soft knocks on a door. Pre-covery images from wide-field programs roll in, and the archive itself becomes an instrument with a very old sustain. One exposure from earlier nights, then another, and together they stretch the data backward, extending the note long enough to refine the path. A modest smear in one frame, a point with a slightly wider profile in another, and the pattern is not drama, but regularity, because the most reassuring sound in science is not the cymbal crash of new, but the patient drum of again. Each rediscovered pixel taps the same beat, there, 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 until the uncertainties shrink, like room echo fading with carpet laid down underfoot. Now I let a photometric routine count the light as if it were counting breaths. The point spread function has its own tone, a signature width that the stars agree upon. The target sits a touch broader, a hair more diffuse than the exacting chorus around it. That slight difference is the subtlest snare roll, indicating a whisper of coma. Never a solo, never a show, just a soft texture laid under the melody of motion. When the algorithm compares the target to its reference stars, the numbers return in a rhythm I've come to trust, and the trust is sleepy by design. Nothing here shouts for your attention. Magnitudes read like volume markings on a score. 10 is loud for a comet, 12 is hushed, 14 is almost a rumour. The lines tonight favour the quiet end, and that suits the ears we bring to bed. You won't catch this traveller unaided, and you don't need to. The surveys will do the listening for you, converting photons to counts, counts to curves, and curves to a soft assurance that it is there, moving, warming a little, and obeying the same gentle physics that has guided the long echo comets since our instruments learned how to hear them. I watch a telemetry strip that plots sky plane motion in small ticks per hour. The slope is steady. The phase angle changes in a beat that feels like walking speed. There's a trace of non-gravitational syncopation, expected as it warms. Those tiny puffs of gas are like breath between notes, nudging the tempo without rewriting the song. The solver can absorb that with a term or two, and I appreciate how the math allows a place for breath, how a model can include a pause without claiming the music has changed key. Even the uncertainties have a rhythm when you stare long enough, and in that long look, the heart rate of the problem slows to match our breathing. A different display shows distance columns, and I read them quietly, as if they were measures on a staff. Sun to object narrowing toward a patient low point, Earth to object holding to a safe, comfortable span. The perihelion will arrive at a civilized tempo rather than a rush. The minimum distance to us stays roomy enough to keep the whole sequence in pianissimo. The comfort is not spin. It is arithmetic played softly, and arithmetic has a very dependable beat. In the control room of the mind, I give each device a turn to lead the ensemble. The wide-field imager lays down the baseline, position, brightness, timestamp. The spectrograph adds a thin, high note where a faint coma begins to scatter sunlight. The orbit solver keeps time without ornament. I think of how much of astronomy is really listening, because listening forces patience, and patience lowers the volume on worry. A single night can fool you, but a season of nights turns noise into tone, and tone into a steady guide that lets your shoulders settle deeper into the bed while the numbers keep playing on the screen. If the object brightens a little closer in, the metronome will show it as a slow swell rather than a spike, and instruments like Rubin, Atlas, and other sky scanners will share the beat across longitudes. That global relay is its own quiet music. One site hands the night to another. The graph continues without a gap. And somewhere under the data, the ocean of air between domes and deserts holds the same neutral hum you hear now. I like how that hum makes room for sleep, how information can be honest and still soft, how the tick of a tracking mount can be a lullaby if you let it. The last thing for tonight is a small explanation about magnitude and expectation, because a realistic score preserves the calm. Cameras, with their long exposures and sensitive chips, can lift a whisper into audibility. Eyes, with their short integrations, cannot. When you see a photograph of a slim green envelope and a thin tail, hear it as a recording that brought the microphone closer, not as a promise that the room itself will sing to you. The room stays quiet. The instruments do the singing on your behalf, and I will keep translating the melody into slow, even breath for as long as you need. The console light dims a step, the tracking error drops to the noise floor, and the spectrograph ticks once. What makes a path interstellar? The answer is quieter than it sounds. A path is interstellar when it never closes, when the curve does not fold back into a loop around the sun, but stays open like a road that keeps going past the last mile marker. In the language of orbits, that open road is a hyperbola, and it carries a little leftover speed even far from our star. Small, but never zero. So the traveller is free to pass through and keep travelling. Bound paths are different. They are neighbourhood streets, ellipses where comets and asteroids return in long, patient laps. The energy is negative there, which simply means the sun's pull is enough to keep them on a recurring tour. For an interstellar visitor, the energy ledger shows a surplus. The sun cannot collect full fare. The curve bends inward, tips its hat, then bends outward again. If we were to draw it on a clear page, you would see a single approach, a graceful swing, and then a departure that does not repeat. We have seen this kind of road twice before in our modern records. In 2017, a small, unresolved wanderer slipped by with no visible coma, puzzling but real. In 2019, a dustier traveller followed, unmistakably comet-like and active. Those two set the precedent. They made it easier to recognise the third when the numbers lined up. This is not an unfamiliar drama now. It is a route we can name, a crossing that belongs to a larger map, the open road that connects one star's outskirts to another's. Direction matters, though not as destiny. Early sky notes placed the approach from the crowded richness near Sagittarius, a region busy with background stars. That does not mean the home was the galactic centre, only that our line of sight ran that way while the traveller entered our system. On a chart, the motion is steady, unhurried by our standards, a patient diagonal toward the inner lanes, where sunlight is stronger, then an equally patient drift away again, as if a long highway cut obliquely across a town and back out to quiet country. Why not captured? Because capture needs a very specific meeting. A planet would have to be close, the timing exact, the speed right for a deep energy exchange. Most of the time, the distances are too large and the angles too shy. Even Jupiter, strong as it is, can do little without a tight encounter, and nothing here suggests one. The visitor arrives with a good head of speed and leaves with most of it intact. Our system plays host without adding a permanent address. The road stays open. The traveller does not park. A comet can breathe a little as it warms, and those breaths matter. Sunlight loosens gas from the surface, and the tiny thrusts from that release nudge the path by the smallest of margins. Orbit solvers handle this with special terms, acknowledging that a road can have crosswinds without changing its destination, and in that spirit we allow the model to bend by a whisper without rewriting the route. Because a good map includes the gentle truth that motion is never perfectly clean when the traveller carries its own weather. Comparison is comforting. The first interstellar visitor left us with questions about shape and nature because it seemed airless and dry. The second looked and behaved like a familiar comet, just not from here. Our current traveller sits closer to that second case. It is modestly active and faint. It follows the grand rule that dust will stream away from the sun, and that a dim envelope can appear where sunlight kisses off gas for the first time in a very long while. The road looks known, even if the starting city does not. Interstellar can sound larger than it needs to. It does not mean extragalactic, nor does it suggest anything technological. It simply points to origin. Material made around another star, drifting loose, and, by the ordinary statistics of systems forming and jostling, occasionally crossing ours. Think of neighbourhoods sharing a long arterial road. Sometimes a bit of traffic enters, passes the town square, and exits toward another horizon, and all of it follows the same calm rules of motion that our own traffic obeys. Safety lives in the geometry. The swing by the sun happens well outside Earth's lane, and our own minimum distance from the traveller stays gracious and wide. Nothing about the road brings it near our doorstep. Brightness remains mild, a level that cameras and careful telescopes can gather while eyes at a window will not. This keeps the mind at ease. We can let the numbers do their work without feeling hurried, because there is time to understand a path that does not loop back, a route that passes and recedes in a measured, almost courteous way. So the small answer to the small question is this: a path is interstellar when the road never closes. The longer answer is gentler still. It is interstellar when the energy is just enough to carry a traveller from one district of the galaxy to another, when gravity can bend but not bind, when sunlight warms but does not arrest the motion. And if a road like that passes our corner and continues on, where will it run next? Postcard, dated 2025-0701. A field sown with faint stars, and in the corner a new stitch bright enough to tug at the hem of night. The Atlas scheduler turns its page, and somewhere on a volcanic slope, the dome's slit looks like a small cut in dark cloth. The exposure begins, threads gather, and on the sensor the fabric of sky accepts one more knot of light. I whisper the coordinates the way a tailor names pattern lines, careful and exacting. A flag goes up in the control software, a neat pin in the margin. The frame saves. Another follows. We check the parallax against the known weave, and the drift does not match the usual warp of catalogued points. The seam is new. Inside the lab, the air is cool and even, as if the room itself were a bolt of linen kept taut on a table. I relay the finding, and within minutes a familiar quilting circle forms across the world. ZTF pulls pre-covery patches from its archive, edging the shape with older stitches that make the outline truer. A dot here, a gentle elongation there, and suddenly the panel has longer selvages to work with. Each added square narrows the uncertainty, and the border of doubt shrinks like fabric steaming smooth. We are not guessing. We are tailoring a path until it holds its shape. The minor planet center posts its careful label, and I can feel the tag settle on the garment. 2 names share the collar. One that tells what it is, third, Interstellar, and one that tells how it behaves, commentary. 3I Atlas, and also C2025N1 Atlas. The jewel mark is not for show. It declares both heritage and cut, origin and drape. I like that the interstellar flag sits alongside the old comet syntax, because it keeps the new thread tied to the rest of the wardrobe we already understand. Nothing flamboyant, just a clean label basted in with tidy, durable stitches. Early frames invite the eye to compare edges. Against the crisp points of background stars, the newcomer's profile looks a touch broader, as if a fine wool had raised the slightest nap. There's a hint of a halo, the loosest fringe suggesting dust lifted by sun-warmed ice. Tail. Only the beginning of one, a faint line that aligns, as it should, with the anti-solar direction, a straight grain pulled by light and wind. We add time and watch the fringe lengthen. The loom of physics is reliable here. Dust follows one set of threads, ions another, and together they lay a quiet pattern any comet from any cupboard would recognize. Set a small stillness here. The fans draw a gentle draft through the room. The monitors soften to a matte glow. The chair's fabric gives under your shoulders. Air moves, but barely. Your breath lays parallel lines across the ribs. Far away, a night insect rasps at an unseen screen, and then forgets to continue. I count a slow 5 and let the weave hold us. Nothing new needs sewing for a moment. By morning in Europe, institutions with long histories of careful work have posted notes. A brief analysis from the Canaries. A measured paragraph that reads like a swatch card. Colour, faint activity, no alarm. Newswires pick up the story and stitch it from newsroom to newsroom without the usual sequence. The language stays plain, third of its kind, not a threat, on a passing course. That is the line I want to keep. We aren't cut in a costume for spectacle. We're hemming a modest truth so it won't fray under rumour. The piece holds because the pattern fits, because several hands have traced and retraced it on paper smooth as vellum. The geometry we keep returning to is friendly. Perihelion will occur well inside Mars's lane, yet far from ours, a measured distance that keeps our corner of the quilt unruffled. Closest approach to Earth, wide, roomy, comfortable even by planetary standards. Brightness? A quiet fabric, visible to instruments and long exposures, too muted for unaided eyes, so the night sky above your window will not change its tone. I think that helps sleep. When a new patch is added to the cosmic coverlet and nothing pulls or puckers, one can lie under it without fuss, warmed by the knowledge that the seams are strong and the design is patient. Back in the logs, the designation's letters look like embroidery you've seen before. Atlas means the Vigilant Survey. The 3I means this thread came from outside our local bolt. The C2025N1 tells you the month and the cut of comet. The discipline is comforting. Every symbol has a place. Each place is part of a longer loom, and the longer loom makes a garment you can wear without it tugging at your attention. Even the uncertain parts, size, exact spin, fine composition, are just unsewn edges we'll base later, not raw rips to fear. With each night, the hems will tighten. With each spectrum, the lining will show. With each orbit update, the panel will sit flatter against the body of known things, and in that long, smooth settling, the mind follows suit and relaxes into the cloth. I add the last line to tonight's postcard and pin it to the board beside the older notices. Discovery on July 1st. Rapid confirmations. Faint coma emerging. Safe path declared. A small garment finished enough to wear, with space left for later tailoring when better fabric arrives from larger mirrors and quieter detectors. We step back from the board, let the pieces prove they belong to one design, and set the shears down gently on felt, so they will not ring. At 02:14, the room remembers how to breathe. Listen first. A soft room hush, the quiet fan like distant breakers, and beneath it, a steadier murmur, as if the solar wind were a far-off surf folding and unfolding across a patient shore. Instruments hold their course the way a keel holds a line, and the traveller ahead of us rides that unseen water, not cutting it so much as consenting to be carried by its long, low swells. A comet's coma is a tide rising from the object itself. Heat reaches shallow depths, trapped ices loosen, gas lifts tiny grains of dust, and together they spread outward like foam that thickens as it leaves the rock pools. In that widening ring, sunlight scatters, and the glow becomes easier for cameras to net. Nothing crashes or splashes here. It's a slow flood, a measured set of ripples building around a small island that keeps drifting on the same broad current. From that island of nucleus, two streams slip astern. One is the dust tail, heavier, slower particles that bend with the solar breeze, but still remember their starting place. The other is the ion tail, lighter, charged, and more obedient to the interplanetary field, peeling straight downwind from the sun, lean as a wake, drawn by a steady rudder. Put simply, the dust lays a curving trail like a boat arcing through a bay, while the ion stream points cleanly down current, a long, narrow lane of blue-leaning spray that marks the water's push more than the boat's will. Colour can join the scene without making it loud. Some comets show a sea glass green near the head, when fragile molecules are nudged by sunlight. Our cameras are better fishermen than our eyes, and catch that tint even when the naked view stays slate grey. If you see a photograph with a thin green sheen and a pale tail, think of it as a long exposure taken from a pier in low surf. More patient than the eye, more willing to wait for the faintest swash to reach the pilings. Geometry is the quiet pilot here, and it steers the tail the way a tide steers driftwood, always away from the sun, always in conversation with the wind and the slow turn of the traveller's path. And because dust grains keep a little of their launch, their trail bows gently, while ions, being quick to answer the field, pull taut in a straighter run behind, so the whole figure becomes a calm double wake, one branch broader and slightly arced, the other slimmer and truer to the down current line, and across minutes and hours that figure breathes like a harbour, breathing with the tide rather than like a ship racing a storm. If you try to watch, technique is the harbour light. This traveller is faint, comfortable for wide surveys and well-tuned telescopes, shy for unaided eyes. Smart trackers plate solve the sky, then idle like anchored buoys while the sensor gathers what the surf lifts to it. Exposures stack, the blurred sea of starlight settles, the wake appears. You can almost hear the software ring the bell at the end of each frame, a small buoy clang that says, gently, there, and then there again, until a path emerges as simply as a channel marked by posts at dusk. The wind can change its mind by degrees, and so can the space weather that shapes an ion tail. Features may kink or straighten, a stripe may waver, faint streamers may come and go like ripples along a sandbar when the tide turns. None of that unsettles the broader voyage. The object keeps to its outward lane after swinging by the sun, a vessel passing the mouth of our bay without entering, raising just enough surf to trace its presence, and then letting the swell smooth behind it. Set the charts down and rest with the sound itself. A long, even rush, as if a winter ocean were breathing on the other side of a thick pane. An occasional tick from the mount, like rigging answering a mild gust. The sub-bass of distant air shifting. No crest, No crash, only the shore's patient inhale and exhale while the wake thins and the tide keeps time. Begin close. Imagine a single speck hovering at the edge of vision, finer than flour, the kind of motor-like grain that floats when a window opens and the room forgets to move. This is comet dust at the small end, a thin veil lifted grain by grain as sunlight finds shallow pockets of ice and makes vapor that shepherds particles away from the surface. One grain leaves, then another, and in the quiet between them, the halo thickens not by force, but by count, a suspended mist that makes brightness without ever being bright. Step back a little. The grains are not all the same. Some are small enough to drift like smoke. Some are sturdier, still delicate, but inclined to settle more slowly from the plume. The smallest scatter blue-white sunlight with a different grace than the larger. The larger redden the light as if the mist were tilting toward dusk. Cameras register these tendencies as color indices, subtle numbers that edge warmer when dust takes the lead. None of it is sudden. It is the steady work of a plume that looks like nothing more dramatic than breath on a mirror, evaporating and gathering in the same slow sentence. Pull another step outward. A marginal halo around the nucleus becomes the coma, and with time the coma's rim grows loose, drifting downwind from the sun until a tail takes form. At this scale, the grain's choices are quiet, but visible. The smallest answer, pressure and field, draw in a straighter plume. The larger keep a little of their launch and bow the trail gently. Underneath, radiation pressure and the solar wind set the drift's direction, a persistent breeze you cannot see, written only in how the mist arranges itself in space. Instruments compare the target's shape to nearby stars and find it a shade broader, a smear just beyond the point spread function, as if the mist had thickened by one invisible notch. Now the field expands. The sky grows around the traveller. The star crowd reasserts its quiet grid. In that larger frame, you can still think in tiny terms, because the whole spectacle is built from small decisions. Grains loosened from a dark crust. Pores collapsing as ice leaves. Micro fragments lifted, and then encouraged to go on. And when the plume's numbers add up, the coma's surface brightness crosses a threshold the way fog crosses a road, from hint to presence, without ever announcing itself with edges. And even in this one long, gentle sentence, the effect is to slow the mind until the thin veil feels almost at rest. What do we know, and what do we let remain soft? Dust sizes in many comets fall in the realm of micrometers upward, with distributions that favour the tiny. The colours cameras measure often skew redder as larger grains dominate. And none of that demands exotic chemistry to explain a mild green near the head, which arises when fragile molecules fluoresce under sunlight in the first glow of a young coma. What we do not know yet, in hard numbers for this traveller, are the exact size fractions, the albedo of the nucleus, and the mass hidden under the mist. Estimates would be easy to recite, and just as easy to mislead. It is more restful to keep the unknowns where they belong for now, like distant fog over water that will clear when the sun climbs. Wider still, and the geometry becomes comfortable. The swing by the sun is set well inside the orbit of Mars and well outside ours, a placement that gives the coma room to develop without bringing the traveller near our neighbourhood. The faintness keeps the whole scene gentle. Long exposures, large mirrors, and plate solving make the mist cohere for us, but a backyard glance will remain unchanged. I like that. A sky that looks the same to the eye and different only to the patient camera is a good sky for sleeping. It means the drama belongs to arithmetic and optics. It means the story can proceed without tugging at the part of you that listens for alarms. When we zoom as far as we can, out beyond one night, beyond one set of images, the dust becomes a statistic rather than a sparkle. Light curves add up, colours average, uncertainties shrink. The plume's tiny nudges are absorbed by orbit fits that include a place for breath. From there, the whole passage looks like a broad weather system of mist moving through a valley, approached from one slope, warmed near the middle, and released on the other side to thin in the open. And in that view, the mind recognizes a pattern large enough to be trusted and small enough to leave sleeping room for doubt. And so we end not with an edge, because mist never honors edges, but with a softness that keeps expanding as you let go of detail. The grain becomes the halo becomes the tail becomes a trace on a chart. The chart becomes a calm assurance that the traveller is modest, unbound, and far. The numbers settle into place. The thin veil thins another shade, the frame holds, the count steady, and, if sunlight leans a little harder on a dark surface, then brightness answers in small steps. The closer this traveller comes to the sun, the more gently lit its skin becomes, and the coma breathes a little wider around it. Not a leap. A gradual turn-in of a dimmer, the kind you barely notice until the room remembers its corners. Warmth invites vapour, vapour carries dust, dust scatters light, and somewhere in that modest chain the gleam lifts a notch. If distance halves, brightness does not simply double. The arithmetic is steeper, and the result, to our cameras, is a soft climb along the graph. The approach toward late October has a patient slope, not a cliff, because nothing here rushes. We are heading for a near solar swing around the end of the month, comfortably far by human measures, about a sun and a half away. And that geometry gives the light room to practice restraint. Your breathing can follow the same slow curve, in and out, with the chart. If the surface carries patches that wake unevenly, then the glow will flicker a touch. A warmer facet turns toward the sun and brightens the flow. A cooler one trails and quiets it. The effect is small, often below the threshold of eyes and barely above the floor of careful plots, yet it gives the light a living quality, as though the dimmer's knob were guided by a steady hand with a pulse. Models leave space for this pulsing, the way a night watch leaves one small lamp burning for the hall. If gas escapes, then the path feels it. Not as a shove, just as a feather of impulse that the orbit solver knows where to place. The non-gravitational terms are like tiny bulbs added at the margin of the light curve, acknowledged, measured, never mistaken for the main lamp. They do not change the direction of the room, they only tint its edges. The traveller remains unbound, the ellipse never closes, the road of light remains open. That is the part to keep in mind when worry tries to brighten itself louder than the facts. If the dimmer keeps turning through October, then expectation stays modest. Cameras may find the comet around the low 11 to 12 range at best, which, to the eye, is still a dark room. That is fine. Sleep does not need spectacles, it needs certainty. Certainty here looks like comfortable distances and a predictable rise and fall, the way window light grows toward morning and ebbs toward evening without ever startling the furniture. And this long sentence, lit from one end to the other by small verbs, leans, invites, carries, scatters, lets the mind follow a beam that never flickers into alarm, but only lengthens across the floor until it thins with the turn of the world. If you'd like the quiet to deepen, let the sound of light be your guide. The screens dim a step. The mount hum sinks until it is more memory than tone. The air holds the weight of a dim hallway, and your pulse moves at the same pace as the exposure count. Nothing stirs in the yard. A distant car leans through a corner and fades. The tiny LED on a charger winks in an unhurried metronome. I say nothing for a few breaths so the glow can settle where it wants, and the room, now a cooled lantern, answers with a hush that feels like the colour of late dusk. If you imagine rotation, how long a full turn might take, then picture lights sweeping across relief, hollows, crust, small knolls of dark dust. The period is not pinned down in public notes, and that's all right. We do not need the exact hours to keep our bearings. We can say that one side takes its turn in warmth, and then cedes the beam to the next, and the balance keeps the object intact. The light on one face asks a little more vapour from that patch. The light on the other gives it back to calm. Slowly, the glow averages to a steady tone on our graphs, which is the only kind of tone worth falling asleep to. If outbursts happen, then they will likely be low on drama, brief brightenings, not fireworks. Some comets sneeze when subsurface gas finds a fracture, others merely sigh. Either way, the angular momentum, the path, the large-scale light stay loyal to the plan. That loyalty shows up as a curve that knows where it's going. Our instruments stand along that curve like lamps on a long stair. Atlas, Rubin, small backyard rigs with careful focus, and each lamp adds a circle to the path, until the whole staircase is lightly visible without a single bulb needing to flare. If geometry is comfort, then the numbers are lullabies. Closest approach to the sun around late October, a fair stretch beyond Earth's lane. Closest approach to Earth itself, even wider, far enough to keep every window closed to worry. These distances are not just figures. They are shading on the wall that says the lamp is across the room, not near the curtain. The more we read them aloud, the more the room returns to quiet, and the more the quiet returns to you. If we must end the thought, let it end like this. Warming brings brightness in small, honest steps, and small steps do not disturb a night. That is enough for tonight. Tonight I offer 3 handrails you can hold with fingertip pressure, like seams you could trace in the dark. They're simple, sturdy, and enough. I'll stitch them into the quiet, one by one, so the mind has places to rest between breaths. First handrail. Rarity, but not alarm. This is the 3rd interstellar visitor we've catalogued with care. The first passed in 2017, the second in 2019, and now this traveller carries the tidy label 3i Atlas alongside a cometary name that tells you how it behaves. 3 is not a crowd here. 3 is a pattern you can hem. The path is open, not a loop, and that's all Interstellar needs to mean tonight. It came from beyond our solar cloth. It will cross the weave, and it will leave without tugging the fabric out of square. Second handrail. Distances that feel like generous seam allowances. Closest to the sun near late October, around a sun and a half away. Closest to Earth, even wider. about 1.8 astronomical units. These are roomy cuts. They keep the edges from fraying into worry. When you picture the layout, imagine our planet as a panel in a quilt, the sun as the center medallion, and the traveller as a narrow sash that passes near the medallion's border but never near our panel. The geometry is calm. The numbers are hems that hold. Third handrail, the instruments that based everything together. Atlas set the first running stitch, catching the motion cleanly. ZTF and others added pre-covery pieces, lengthening the seam so the curve would lie flat. Rubin's wide field helps keep the arc smooth as nights turn. Between them, timestamps become straight pins, astrometry becomes chalk, and brightness measurements become backstitches that won't pull out under gentle strain. You don't have to see any of the stitches to trust the garment. It's enough to know that many hands are sewing along the same line. Here's how to picture it without straining your eyes. Imagine a star chart, like linen stretched on a frame. Right ascension and declination are the warp and weft, the straight threads that keep everything aligned. The traveller moves along that grid a little each night. Software plate solves the field so the pattern doesn't drift, then stacks exposures so the faint thread shows. If you prefer a simpler picture, think of a faint new stitch added each evening where yesterday there was only cloth. After a week, the stitches describe a line you can follow with one finger. If you'd like a practical way to hold the scene in your head, choose one bright star as an anchor, your fingertip on the fabric, and count a slow number of finger widths to the place where reports put the traveller. You won't see it unaided. That's all right. The point is the posture, not the result. It teaches the mind that the sky has a grid, that the grid is steady, and that small motions over many nights become a seam you can trust. In the same way, a steady bedtime makes a seam through your week, keeping the pieces from slipping. Set down the facts and let the cloth breathe for a minute. The fan draws a faint draft across your cheek. The room's edges soften. A quiet overlay of night air settles toward the floor, slow as a folded blanket. Far away, a train rubs the rails and fades. I count 4 heartbeats, then 4 more. The mind loosens its grip, like fingers releasing a spool. Nothing new needs to be added to the quilt of thoughts. We're just smoothing what's already there. Return to the handrails briefly and notice how they carry the weight. Rarity becomes context, not spectacle. Distances become comfort, not countdown. Instruments become caretakers, not sirens. That is the whole design. If a report arrives with a sharper word or a lurid headline, lay our seams over it and see if it still fits. Usually the cloth will show where the cut was careless. Good patterns survive poor trimming. This one does because it is built on measured stitches, dates, angles, magnitudes, placed with even hands. And when such stitching accumulates, the mind recognizes the garment and relaxes into wearing it, letting worry drape off the shoulder and fall to the chair without a sound. I'll fold the corners for you now. 3 handrails, third visitor, generous distances, many instruments. With those, you can cross this room of night without tripping. The thread holds, the seams lie flat. The figure fades like dye washed to a calmer tone, and the image softens until only the cloth remains in a steady hush. Green is our guide tonight. Not a shout of neon, not a painted stripe, only a quiet hue that gathers near the traveller's head like a thread of light, you notice after your eyes have already settled. Cameras see it first. Long exposures, gentle gains, and the sensor's patience bring the color forward. The way a dim exit sign begins to show its character when you linger in a hallway between breaths. What sets that hue upon the air is simple sunlight, doing delicate work. Near the small core, a wisp of gas and dust forms a pale envelope. In that envelope, certain fragile molecules absorb the sun's rays, and then give back a very particular tint. So the coma, the little light cloud hugging, the traveller, runs softly toward green, while the tail, built from grains and faster fading species, keeps a paler look. The physics has no drama to it. The drama is what we keep out. Your eyes, tuned for night, are cautious with colour. At low light, the rods take over and favour shape and motion instead of hue. The camera does not have that habit. It collects light beyond what the eye sustains in a single heartbeat, and the sun becomes a colour you can read, a cool, tender green stitched into a dark field. If you go outside and find nothing with your own gaze, nothing has gone wrong. The green thread lives in the patient arithmetic of photons, and the arithmetic is being done for you. A comet's palette is a moving, balanced lantern. Dust pushes it toward warmer impressions. Gas lets cooler tones breathe at the core. Phase angle, distance, seeing conditions. Each changes the shade by a notch you would only notice if you lay two images side by side and exhaled slowly between them. I think of colour here as a quiet property rather than a sign. It is a report from the light about which actors are on stage, not a verdict about the play itself. Day to day, the green thread holds. In some frames, the coma appears almost grey-white until the exposure deepens. In others, the hue leans a little stronger, and then loosens again, a tide of colour that never rises above a whisper. Part of that is chemistry behaving as it should. Part is the way sensors and filters trace the spectrum. Part is merely the sky's texture on a given night. The constant is the modesty, and modesty is good company for sleep. I remember that earlier, travellers wore their own quiet colours. The first one lacked a visible halo and left us guessing at its nature. The second looked comet true, with dust that made the familiar cools near the head and a straighter, colder blue tail. Our present guest feels closer to that second example, which is to say it looks like what sunlight usually does to a small, distant, icy thing. There is comfort in seeing a hue that belongs to the ordinary dance of light, because ordinary is a harbour in a night like this. If you're tempted to decode the green thread too far, rest. Colour tells us something about molecules that thrive close to the core and fade quickly as they drift, which is why the coma can glow while the tail looks washed of tint. It does not tell us that anything unusual or dangerous is taking place. The distances remain wide, the trajectory open, the brightness low. Think of the hue as a tag on a lantern's wick, useful, small, and not meant to fill the room. There are photographs that make the colour vivid, and they are true in their way. They are also generous, stacked, stretched, and curated to let faint light speak. If you were to sit with the raw frames, you'd find the same truth whispered rather than sung. The whisper is the right register for this story, and that is why the narrative moves at this pace, with pauses where the green can hang in the air like a filament idling before dawn, and with sentences long enough to feel the light lengthen across the floor without ever hurrying you to the window, because the window has nothing urgent to add, and the light is doing all the adding that is needed simply by being itself. It helps to imagine what the instruments do with colour. A spectrograph lays the glow out in a gentle comb, and certain teeth brighten where the molecules give their energy back. A broadband camera sums across that comb and calls the whole quiet balance green. Neither is lying. Each is telling the truth it was designed to tell. Together, they turn a feeling into a measurement, and the measurement into a calm statement about what the light is made of on its way to us. Return to the scene now. A faint head, a slim tail, and around the head a cool aura, almost mint to some senses, jade to others, pearl to an eye in a generous telescope, and to most of us at a window, only a suggestion in the dark. Yet the suggestion is enough, because it lets the mind draw the line even when the room refuses to brighten, and the act of drawing slows the breath until the hue feels like a small hand resting on the shoulder of the night. So I keep the vocabulary spare. Hue, coma, tail, distance, safety. The green thread carries what needs carrying and nothing more. When it thins, the message remains. When it deepens, the message remains. And when you close your eyes and the colour dissolves behind them, the message still remains. Because the message is simply that light has taken the long path to find you, and that this traveller's light happens, for a while, to wear a cool, quiet green, so the green thread returns, softer than before. Walk with me a moment along the sky lane where Mars keeps its long patrol. We move at an easy pace, step by patient step, while far above the traveller follows a quiet arc that happens for a few weeks to share the broad distance of Mars's path without sharing its company. The chart is our sidewalk. Right ascension left, declination forward, and the dotted ephemeris like stepping stones you can place your mind on without looking down. Mars itself is elsewhere on its run. That matters. Sharing a ring of distance is not the same as passing shoulder to shoulder. The planet keeps to its own appointment hours away along the track, and the visitor crosses the same annulus like a person using the outer lane of a park path, while the jogger is already a bend beyond. No rendezvous, no near miss. Just two travellers in one district of the park at different times, each minding their own rhythm. Speed rises as the sun draws closer, yet the walk stays calm, because speed in space is not speed in rooms. The numbers lift in a way our legs never could, tens of kilometres each second, but on our sidewalk they register as a steadier tick of plotted positions, a slightly longer stride between the printed dots. The curve stays open. The energy ledger stays in the black. We keep walking, and the line keeps leaning inward, then preparing, already, to lean back out again. Why do we care about this part of the loop around the park? Because the arc by Mars's distance is a hinge in the story. Inside that radius, sunlight begins to ask more from the surface. Outside, it returns, demands more gently. Somewhere here, the coma learns its shape for the month ahead. The tail listens more closely to the wind. And the material that began far from our sun takes on a little of our star's character before continuing its journey beyond the trees. Observers set their own slow march to match the sky. A wide-field survey in the south hands the night to the next dome west. Amateurs lift small rigs onto warm pavement and let plate-solving nudge each footfall to the right spot. The counts arrive at breakfast on other shores. It feels like a relay down a riverside path, each runner giving the baton with a nod and never breaking the flow. By the time the sun is up for one of us, another has already walked a few more plotted meters in the dark. Ahead lies the turn, late October, a swing past the sun at a generous distance, something like a sun and a half from the center, and well away from Earth's lane. So this stretch by Mars's orbit is the approach road to the doorway. And because geometry is polite here, you can feel how the whole month leads to a threshold without any of the hurry that doorways sometimes cause in crowded stations. Since the station is empty, the platform long, and the train is scheduled with the kind of clock that never raises its voice. Comfort keeps pace with us. The closest pass to our world remains wide. The object doesn't cross our street. The sidewalk under our feet is the same sidewalk we started on. I like repeating that while we walk, because repetition is a kind of handrail, and handrails make long corridors easier at night. There is nothing to race toward, nothing to avoid. Only the steady act of placing one quiet step after another along a map that keeps its promises. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the cadence of elements underfoot. Position, velocity, phase angle, like 3 steps of an even gait. And as the traveller arcs inward, it adds a 4th step for brightness that rises in small paces. And as it arcs outward, it lets that brightness fall again, and the whole walk becomes a loop within us, even though the path above is open, because our bodies know how to answer cycles with breath, and because a long sentence can stretch like a boardwalk over still water, carrying us across the scene without a single plank creaking or a single shadow asking to be named. We come to the place where the track narrows by perspective, the way a path looks thinner as it goes on. The night feels a degree lighter toward the sun and a degree cooler behind us. One more slow step, then one more, and we stop where the corridor opens on a frame of darker sky, with the arc ahead and the month's turn beneath our feet. And at the threshold of the dark field, I rest my hand on the frame. I'm writing to you from the quiet edge of the control room, where the screens have dimmed and the air feels like a thin halo resting on the skin. This is a note for you in the middle of the night, a small letter folded into the hush to say that the traveller we've been following is still gentle, still distant, and still moving through our light like a calm veil that never presses close. When people say closest, they often mean closest to us, and worries rise like breath on a cold pane. Closest here means closest to the sun, perihelion, late in October, and even then the span is wide, about a sun and a half away. Our own lane sits farther out, with the nearest Earth object distance still generous, still more than enough to keep the air around your window motionless. I've read the numbers aloud to this room more than once, because repetition settles like dew, and the dew tells the plants it's safe to keep breathing. What happens at that solar nearness is simple and soft. A little extra warmth reaches shallow layers, vapors slip out through old pores, a faint haze thickens around the core and drifts away from the sun. We call it a coma, though it is fully awake to light. You won't see much with your eyes alone. The coma is too pale for that. But the instruments catch it and tell us, line by patient line, that physics is behaving like a familiar morning fog. It lifts when the lamp of day grows strong. It thins when it cools. And none of this alters the long route the traveller is set to take. You may hear louder words elsewhere. That's part of the world now. Brisk headlines, sharp angles, questions filled with worry's reflection rather than light. I keep a small brush near the mind for such dust. One stroke, then another. Third, interstellar object, hyperbolic path, no hazard. Another stroke, comet-like behavior, faint activity, modest brightness. Another, perihelion far from us, minimum Earth distance, wider still. In a few moments the pain clears, and what looked like a storm becomes a patch of mist in the distance, honest about being missed and nothing more. If someone whispers strange, I answer softly that strange can mean unfamiliar, not unsafe. If someone asks, could it be a machine? I say that instruments are very good at telling the difference between sunlight on gas and light on metal. The spectrum wears a signature, like dew wears a sparkle, and here the sparkle is the old, quiet signature of vapours we've met before. It is all right to want the world to be surprising. It's kinder to the mind to anchor surprise to what the counts can carry. You can keep company with the data without letting it brighten the room. Set your phone to a low glow, then read only the first lines. The name, the distances, the word unbound. Step away before you fall into more detail than sleep can hold. If you wake in the dark and wonder where the traveller is, picture a small haze moving through a field of steady stars, far off, with a tail that knows to keep to the anti-solar side, and with a pace that matches the quiet tick of your pulse when it has learned the trick of evening. I've kept one long table open beside me, positions and their gentle changes, and there is a peace in seeing how each entry agrees with the next, because the sky in these moments is like breath across glass. It leaves a brief sign, then clears, then leaves another, and the series of signs makes a line that needs no argument to defend it, only patience to read it. And the patience itself is a blanket that keeps the day from creeping back into the spine while the world outside remembers that night has work to do, making the edges soft again. If numbers help you sleep, keep only 2. The sun hug distance, about 1.4 astronomical units. The earth hug distance, even more. That is the essence. If words help instead, keep only 5. Distant, unbound, faint, familiar, safe. They are a small fog that cools the noise around the mind. They bead and fall, and when they fall, the surface beneath them is left clear, and that clarity is what the nervous system asks for when the day has tossed too many stories into your lap. I promised a letter, not a lecture, so I'll add a domestic thought. Rinse the day from the jaw. Let the tongue rest on the floor of the mouth. Draw the curtain so the room keeps its pale weather. Picture the coma as a little cloud that never crosses your roof and never asks your attention to rise. Picture the tail as a thin breath beyond the far trees, pointing away from the sun like steam that chooses the lee side of a wall. And picture the path as a ribbon of haze laid across a distant field that you can see only when you lower your eyes and let the edges soften. I'll stay here a while longer, counting quiets between exposures, the way gardeners count cool nights before spring, and if a small alert pings, I'll read it first, brush it clean, and keep only what belongs in this room's weather. You don't have to hold the story anymore. I will. And when sleep finds you, it will enter like fog through a gate, slow and level, not asking anything of you beyond the kindness of letting your shoulders fall. You can let your shoulders drop here. The sky does, too. Night shift. The lab speaks in whispers. A rack fan tracing a low line, the coolant pump purring in thirds, the tracking mount mumbling its sub-audible vowels as it follows the sky. A green standby LED blinks at a heart-slow tempo. The coffee is old and unnecessary. I listen to the instruments instead. Tonight, their hush is enough. Post-perihelion nights have a different pitch. The swell has passed. The traveller is easing outward, and the graphs answer with quieter amplitudes. Light curves step down like a volume slider, glide in a few marks lower each dawn. The coma loosens, the tail thins, and the sensor counts return to numbers that read like soft dynamics in a score. Pianissimo, then a hair softer still. No drama, only the music decrescendoing as it crosses the back half of the hall. Ephemerides turn outward in patient ticks. I run a fresh solution and watch the columns roll. Date, distance from the sun increasing by careful margins. Distance from Earth already generous and growing. Phase angle quietly changing its key. In the solver's text, the eccentricity sits above 1 with the poise of a sustained note. The predictive line keeps curving toward the open, and that open is the sound of freedom from a repeating refrain. The object remains unbound. The room nods. A few new frames arrive from the world beyond these walls, Chile's dry air adding a faint, faithful signature. A northern island contributing a handful of photons polished by cold. A backyard rig stacking long minutes until the halo resolves into a whisper of shape. Tail features persist, yes, but in the small register. Streamers that look like the narrow harmonics of a thin reed when the wind is light. Nothing in them contradicts the steady theme. If anything, they are the room tone of space written in chalk. I mark a quiet minute for you now. Let the instrument hush carry the weight. Air slides through a vent with a silk sound. A distant elevator door closes far down the building, padded and sure. The keyboard rests its hands. I count 8 breaths, each one slow enough to cross the measure without touching the sides. And in the long arc of the count, a sense returns that this whole enterprise, finding a few extra photons, laying them on the page, calling the faint by name, is a kind of soft percussion where even the rests are part of the song. Outbound, the model greets small non-gravitational nudges with the same calm as before. I include the terms, let them tint the fit, and watch the residuals settle. The tail's little conversations with the solar wind keep writing thin accents onto images, but they speak in the language of ordinary weather. A kink, a faint streamer, then smoothness again. If an outburst were to happen now, it would be a short drum brush on the snare, not a strike on the cymbal. A momentary lift in brightness that fades back into the prevailing hush. And even as I say it, I can feel the way the ears expect the stillness to resume, because the score has trained them to trust the pianissimo more than the flourish. Legacy work happens at this hour. I label sets cleanly, fold exposure stacks into their folders, and write the simplest captions a later mind can read. Third interstellar guest. Faint. Comet true. Perihelion comfortably passed. Outbound on an open line. These are not headlines. They are chords. They will be repeated by other instruments in other rooms, and the repetition will make them truer in the way a theme becomes truer each time the orchestra returns to it, until years from now a student will listen and hear only steadiness where we once strained to hear the first entrance. Across the network, Rubin keeps its broad ear on the sky, and the older surveys add their steady microphones. Together, They show that a world can be mapped by listening more than by looking, and that the quietest parts of the map teach the most about patience. And the sentence goes on, long and level, because in its length you can feel what endurance sounds like when it refuses to raise its voice or change its tempo, and when it prefers to prove a point by holding the same honest note until the room itself becomes tuned to it. If you need a final pair of anchors, the outbound path stays wide of us, and the brightness keeps drifting toward the floor, where only large mirrors and long exposures can hear it. That is the region of sky I like best, a region that asks us to admit our limits, and then to accept the gift of instruments that extend our senses without ever asking for hurry. The lab agrees by doing what labs do at night, saving with quiet clicks, syncing with slow lights, and letting the fans hum like distant waves in a building that knows how to keep time for sleepers. I dim the console by one step, cap the lens with a soft press, and log a final line about the traveller's calm retreat. The mount's motors wind down to their idle tone. The spectrograph's lamp cools to its lowest glow. The last file name lands with the softest key sound you can imagine. I rest a fingertip on the trackpad to feel the machine's gentle purr and set the dial to night. The room is quiet now, and the traveller is already a softer mark in the dark. We followed it together across patient nights, the third visitor of its kind, unbound on a hyperbolic road, a small companion to thought rather than a spark to worry. It came from beyond our sun's family, gathered a faint coma, let a slim tail point away from the light, and kept to a course that bends once and keeps going. Instruments watched kindly. Atlas began the ledger. ZTF and others lengthened the line. Rubin listened wide. The ephemerides kept time in even ticks. Numbers stayed friendly. Perihelion near late October, about a sun and a half from the centre. Closest to Earth, still roomier. Comfortable space you could fit many moons across. Brightness modest, more for careful sensors than for windows. Each fact settled like dew, and the dew never turned to frost. We let colour speak in a whisper, cool green near the head when sunlight nudged fragile gases, paler down the tail where those breaths thinned. We allowed small nudges from outgassing to tint the math without changing the song. We said distant and meant it. We said familiar and meant it too. If you drifted for a while, the story kept breathing without you. That is the kindness of the sky and of careful work. It goes on in the background hum while you rest. And if you stayed with me to the end, I'm glad for the company. Quiet company makes good science gentler, and good science makes quiet company easier to find. Thank you for letting this calm road carry you. May your night inherit the same steadiness, soft steps, slow air, instruments at idle, and a horizon that asks nothing more of you than sleep. I'll keep the dim watch here, counting the low ticks between frames, while your shoulders lower and the dark remembers how to hold you. Good night.